All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is Jim Crow laws and racial segregation. These are the notes. USII4c is the SOL code. What you're going to do, you're going to use the the fill in the blank notes that I gave you in your notebook and fill them out as you listen to this lecture. I'm going to go really quick as fast as I can on this. I'm actually going to be explaining certain things in class, especially the Plessy v. Ferguson case. And we're also going to be going over some actual Jim Crow laws that are really ridiculous. But the time period is Jim Crow. We're talking about segregation of whites and African Americans. And the idea of segregation is to keep separate. That's what segregation means, is to separate. In this picture here, you have whites only drinking fountain and a colored drinking fountain. Keep in mind, I'm using the terminology of the time. Colored indicating African Americans. But you have the whites drinking fountain looks like it's a chill, has some sort of chiller option to the water to make it more refreshing, while the colored drinking fountain is straight from the tap. So we'll be discussing why that is. You had segregation of all, basically in the South, you would have segregation of all facilities. You could not, whites and blacks were not to mingle with each other. That was the idea behind segregation. So if you're in a big city, you'd have a white movie theater and a black movie theater. Whites weren't allowed to go in the colored movie theater. Neither were African Americans allowed to go in the white movie theater. And if there was a small town, sometimes they would mix, but there would be a white section and a black section. That's how it would be set up. The whole thing's based on race, directed primarily against African Americans. I'll put those back up. Directed primarily against African Americans, although other nationalities were mistreated as well under these laws. In other cases, you have other groups as well, like Latinos in the Southwest. Remember, there's not a lot of Latinos in the Southeast because of the immigration from Mexico and other Latin states didn't really happen until after the 1960s. So the thing is, it wasn't a widespread amount of Latino immigrants coming into the eastern part of the United States, but you have a lot of them, many of them in the western part, and then so you actually had the segregation not only with blacks but with Latinos as well. And we're going to be talking about how intense Jim Crow was and just how it actually created social norms and social norms, meaning what's considered normal, really racist behavior. And it was the idea behind Jim Crow was beyond just you have to or beyond separating whites and blacks, but it also went to dehumanizing African Americans. And that's what you see in this picture, this sign here: no dogs, Negroes, or Mexicans. I mean, it's comparing minorities to animals. Also, American Indians were obviously going through the same type of segregation, but they weren't considered citizens until 1924. The idea was that they were their own, their reservation was their own country, and they were, since they're sovereign, they have no rights of Americans. So the rights under the 14th and 15th Amendment did not apply to American Indians. Not until legislation was passed in 1924 that allowed them to do so. There's a video here, and I'm going to show you that next class because it just takes a little bit too long. But we'll show that video next class. Here you have what were the idea of Jim Crow laws. They're passed to discriminate directly to African Americans. They're made discriminatory practices legal in many communities and states. So if you did not want to serve African Americans, you did not have to. Today, you can't make that decision. There are federal laws that protect African Americans from discrimination. But then you were allowed to make the decision. In some cases, you weren't allowed to decide whether you wanted to be integrated. If there was a company that wanted say a restaurant that wanted to have an integrated food services, they were barred from city codes or state law to allow them to do so. And I'm going to show you guys some examples of those type of laws. And the idea is to keep whites and blacks separate. That was the point. And if someone broke that rule, then they were issued a fine or arrested. Plessy v. Ferguson is a big case. The idea is unequal opportunities in housing, education, and government. African Americans were segregated in homes. They couldn't live with whites. They ended up getting the houses on the the wrong side of the tracks, so to speak. They were not given the nice homes, the nice housing reserved for whites. Work, the good jobs were reserved for whites. If African American wanted to work, they could work a job serving whites. Education, white schools had the nicer schools. Black schools had the hand-me-down materials, like textbooks and so forth. And we'll discuss that later. And government, African Americans weren't allowed to. So in many cases, they made rules that prevented African Americans from voting and prevented African Americans from running for office. I mean, basically, you're seeing the black codes reemerge. It's all the things that the reasons why they passed the Civil Rights Act of 1866. And you would think that a federal law would supersede those state laws. In fact, it should. But there was a lawsuit that happened in 1896, and the Supreme Court sided with the state of Louisiana. Now, I'm going to go over this case in class. It's a pretty long story, and I don't think you want to hear it in here. But a long story long, you have a man who is not 100% African American. In fact, he's 7/8 white, 1/8 African American, and he received a $25 fine for sitting on the whites only section of a train. And he sued to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court justices said that since Ferguson wanted to go to a destination and wanted to go to New Orleans, and the white section and the black section reached New Orleans at the exact same time, while they were separate, they were equal. His intention was to travel. They made it to that destination equally at the same time, so there was no inequality as to the service. The only thing that was unequal was the segregation, but you can have segregation so long as everything's equal, which means this. If you have a white drinking fountain and you want to segregate that, you have to have a black drinking fountain close by. A white restroom and a black restroom. A white school, a black school. A whites only section in a restaurant will have to have an area where African Americans could get fed. In many cases, that was in the kitchen. Excuse me. And I'm going to go over these examples of Jim Crow laws when next we meet, before we talk about Booker T. Washington and W.B. Du Bois. And when we're done with all the Family Tree projects and we're through that, we're going to talk about Jim Crow laws as social norms and how damaging they were. But what I'll do is I'll give you one list of questions one slide of Jim Crow laws, and then you're going to have your question on the for the forum. It's going to cover those type of laws and maybe what your reaction to seeing these laws. The first one is, no person or corporation shall require any white female nurse in wards or rooms in hospitals, either private or public or private, in which Negro men are placed. So a big thing in the South was to prevent there's a fear of interracial marriages. And the idea was that if you had an African American man with a white woman, that they might somehow fall in love and be married and have interracial children. Today, happens all the time. It's not a big deal, but back then it was considered the ultimate stigma or bad thing. So in order to prevent that, you made sure that you separated white women from black men. Of course, they didn't have any laws that separated white men from black women. So what you have is called a double standard, and we'll talk about that in class. The marriage of a person of Caucasian blood with a Negro, Mongolian, Malayan, or Hindu shall be null and void. I mean, whites cannot marry blacks, but they also can't marry, Mongolian means someone of Asian descent. That's also incredibly racist. That's saying that everyone from Asia is from Mongolia. Malayan, that's Malaysia, which would be Pacific Islander. So they're saying you cannot marry anyone from, that's of Pacific Island descent. Or Hindu, which would be anyone from Indian to probably Persian or Arabic, which is, if you were to talk to anyone of that region, they will not consider themselves Hindu. Hindu itself is a religion, not a group of people. So that would be Arizona. Press the wrong button there. There we go. All marriages between white person and a Negro, or between a white person and a person of Negro descent, to the fourth generation, inclusive hereby forever prohibited. That means you cannot marry. In Florida, you could have interracial marriage so long as the person has five, or if they're mixed, then they have to be 5 generations mixed. So if your great grandfather was black and you were white and you were marrying a white person, then you could have the marriage. If your great grandpa was black and you wanted to marry a white person, you could not have that marriage in Florida. No colored barber shall serve as barber to white women or girls. Again, separating black men from white women or girls. And we'll be talking about that law in class. All right, so what I want you to do is you're going to go on to Edmodo and you are going to write a response, and your response is going to be based on those laws that you saw and your reactions to those laws. All right, well, have a good night.